All right, making another crafting slash trench crusade video, and I am currently, in addition to finishing off my generic new Antioch, except I have definitely spiced mine up. I changed the helmets that came with them for World War I German helmets. And because I'm a huge fan of Wolf Brigade, I actually gave them the red lenses and the gas masks. Um, I didn't pick them up, but on my mini factory, I think they do have STLs for the figures from Wolf Brigade, Jinro Wolf Brigade, which is, in my opinion, one of the best animes ever made. You know, I mean it, because I don't even think I'd consider Jinro to be an anime in the traditional sense, because when I think anime, usually I think chibi bullshit, big heads and little drops above their head to show emotion, and jaggedy when they're mad, and I honestly despise that, right? And there's none of that in general. It's well animated, it's realistic looking, even though the idea of somehow Germany occupying Japan and winning World War II is kind of silly, if that's what they're trying to say. I don't know. Um, but regardless, those guys, I'm finishing them up. I gave my sniper priest a kind of weird World War One ish camouflage cloak, with like red, brown, and like a baby poop yellow and a green. And now the average troopers, I'm not going to bother with their camouflage, but I do have a unit that will get camouflaged, and that's going to be, and here's where I enter semi rant mode. That's going to be my Americans, right? Now, for whatever reason, so far the lore guys, behind this game, who honestly I think are kind of terrible, and I'm would be better at creating lore for this game than they are. And I'm not even like a pro. I'm just a guy that runs role playing games, and has ran like D&D games and stuff since the early '80s. Um, so if that sounds arrogant, I apologize. I'm not trying to be arrogant, but I'm starting to feel like their complete lack of inclusion of Russia, while including the Polish Lithuanian Commonwealth. We're talking 1914 here, fellas. Whether you like it or not, Tsar Nicholas was ruling Russia in 1914. Uh, you know, so there's that. And of course, the complete lack of any of the nations of the New World. Uh, no America, no Canada slash Quebec, you know, give the Quebecois their due and refer to them as something different, I guess. I don't know. I mean, to me, it makes no sense. I don't understand why Canada puts up with the Quebecois, but whatever, you know. Um, while you should never assume a person's motivation, you can assume their actions or judge their actions, right? You really can't judge motivation. I don't know if these guys are a bunch of American hating, libtards from Europe somewhere, or whether, what their problem is. It's like, for a bunch of people that I have been told on pretty good authority hate Christianity, honestly, most of the writing they've done has been relatively, even the more heretical parts, relatively respectful, I think, honestly. I mean, when they're when they're telling stories in game, the people, the good guys, they're, acting like they're the good guys. They're talking about the Christ and, serving God and this, that, and the other thing. And they're doing it in a very believable way. So that writing part, I don't think they've done as horrible a job. Now, some of the stuff that some people find heretical, I am unsure of. And I know I've mentioned this before, but it's like when the one guy was concerned about shrines that had artillery pieces in them, and the artillery pieces had or have like crucifixes on them, and he found that to be very heretical. This man who found that to be very heretical obviously knows very little about the war in Yugoslavia or even in Russia now, where it is not uncommon for Russian troops to wear icons of venerated saints and Jesus himself. And, in Serbia, they actually had a war song that talked about how their artillery rounds were guided to the enemy by the hand of God. So thinking that that's heretical would lead me to believe that the guy who is calling that heretical is probably a Protestant and probably doesn't know a whole lot about how warfare is treated by other denominations of Christianity. Orthodoxy has, while peace is always best, in Orthodoxy, if you have to go to war to preserve your faith, nation, etc., while it does hamper your ability to receive communion for a number of years, it's kind of like sometimes you just got to do the thing you got to do, right? And the worst thing that could ever happen is to allow enemies to destroy the church, right? So you have to ask yourself, what is more terrible? Going to war to preserve the faith, and in the case of Trench Crusade, all of humanity, or being pacifists and allowing the entire faith to die out because you have been indoctrinated by Western beliefs about pacifism and, like Christians should never defend themselves, etc. Those are Western Protestant beliefs. Those are not Orthodox beliefs. Of course you defend the faith, and of course you defend your nation. These are not even questions. If someone attacks your church, your faith, you just defeat them. If they can't be reasoned with by words and by trying to convince them that what they're doing is not cool, then you have to take up arms and do it the other way. Is it ideal? No, of course not. It's not ideal. It's not what you would want. I mean, obviously, you would want peace, but if the enemy refuses peace, then you do what is required of you. And then, like in the case of Orthodox Christianity, it is common for soldiers returning from the field to have to spend a couple of years purifying themselves before they attempt to receive communion. Because as we are taught, if you try to take communion while you are, full of sin, then it will just turn into sin in your mouth. It's better not to take communion if you're not prepared for it than it is to take it and think everything's going to be okay. Because while I would suggest you speak to a priest about this, uh, it is my understanding that no, everything will not be okay. You have actually committed a grave sin by trying to do that. So, don't. But of course, if you're a Protestant, a Western Christian, whatever, you will have probably never heard of a lot of this stuff. And I can say this because, I know a lot of Protestants. The area I'm from, everyone up there's like Pentecostal or something, or Baptists. But yeah, these are things you're just simply not taught. And because you have fallen into the point of view that, everything's sola scriptura, it causes you to actually ignore important things, like while the scripture is divinely uh, influenced, or I'm forgetting the right word. The scripture is divinely inspired. Well, the writings of the church fathers are too. So by believing in one set of books, but refusing to read anything by the original church fathers, like John Chrysostom and Polycarp and things like that, you're basically denying yourself the fullness of Christianity. And also a lot of wisdom on just how to live life right, and no, of course, we don't worship our icons. Like when I look at the icon of Saint Matthew, it's just to remind me of, the fact that I was once a horrible sinner and a person who rejected Christ, but through the mercy of Christ and the sacrifice he made for us, I can be redeemed. Now, I rarely, if ever, will say I have been redeemed, because honestly, that's not for me to say. That will be for God to say. Now, I've rambled on about religion and the things Trench Crusade. Well, the two things go hand in hand, right? Especially since the Trench Crusade guys have made a point of making Orthodox specific war bands, for the trench pilgrims. But I'm sure you can make an Orthodox New Antioch force, and who knows, maybe they'll introduce Cossacks or Russians or something like that in the future. That would be really cool, Serbians or whatever. I mean, there's a lot to choose from when it comes to Orthodox. It's basically everyone in the East except Poland, So Um, so yeah, that would be a good hope. But back to what I'm talking about, how I said I would take the lore over for myself. So I've printed out, I found these guys online. Let's see if I can hold it up where you can see what I'm going to be working with. That's right. GIs, that guy's got BAR, which in the game, I wonder if that counts as a machine gun or an automatic rifle. Uh, you know, I mean, it is called a Browning automatic rifle, so I'm assuming that's not a machine gun. But if it is a machine, it doesn't matter. I built the thing on the assumption that it could be a machine gun. So either way, that army list will be legal using New Antioch's basic generic list. Now, I've done this because I suspect, and I could be totally wrong here, and unfortunately, you can't go on X and really ask because all of the people working on the product have fled to the haven of, uh, you know, degeneracy that is Blue Sky. And that should be a big warning, whenever you're listening to anything these people say. If they fled Twitter to go hang out on Blue Sky, where is also a place where people share a lot of stuff that's very, very bad, it kind of makes you wonder why. Like, they had tens of thousands of followers on Twitter, or X, whatever we're calling it, and they have like a tenth of that on Blue Sky. And they're never going to get as many on Blue Sky as they had on Twitter, because the reality is most people stay away from Blue Sky because it is haunted, you could say, infested, maybe is a better word, with pedophiles and various other types of, bad people. So, yeah, you're not gonna see a lot of people go to Blue Sky. It's just a terrible place full of terrible people, and also very, very ideological. So if you're someone like me, you're not welcomed on Blue Sky. And the writer who told the guy, when he said he thought something was um, blasphemous, that he didn't really care about what somebody's imaginary sky daddy or whatever. That guy, if he's in charge of Lauren stuff, right? Unless he's the head boss of this thing, should be fired immediately. I mean, you're writing a game, just to remind those who don't know and those who do know, you are literally writing a game in which the forces of heaven are battling the forces of hell. And you are using the name of an actual real world God that people believe in. Now, these are the same people who would get angry about D&D's deities and demigods because, it had the Hindu gods in it or something, right? But they'll go online and actively mock and ridicule a Christian guy for having concerns, rather than explain to that Christian guy, actually, no, it's not actually really uh, blasphemous, because, and then come up with the reason. Like I said, marking artillery rounds with a cross or a saying from Psalms or something was something that was, again, quite common amongst the Orthodox side of the Yugoslav wars. Now, did the Muslims do similar stuff during those wars? Maybe. I don't know. But they may have been writing, surah and stuff like that from, you know, yeah, from the Quran and extra Quranic sources. So I think that particular gentleman was just confused. And if he ever sees my videos, I hope he takes into account what I'm saying. And, and it helps him out, to understand that no, that's not actually blasphemous. Now, what is blasphemous is the idea of the Metachrists. And, the idea that by eating the actual flesh and blood of the body of a Metachrist, it will turn you into a giant monster. That's blasphemous because whether they intended to or not, it is mocking the Holy Communion, which is one of the major tenets of Christianity. However, the way they've depicted the Muslims is so much worse than how they've depicted Christianity. And I'm not even going to say I disagree with them. That, okay, fine, whatever. I can always just play war bands that don't believe in the Metachrist and don't use communicants. You can do that. That is a thing. Just because it exists in the game doesn't mean you have to take it. And in that way, if I show up at a tournament and stuff, I am letting other players of the game know exactly how I feel about the idea that you could clone the flesh of Christ. And that the flesh of Christ, which, as we all know, is just the flesh of a man, because we're not Gnostics over here, would have magic powers, when in fact it would not. Because all miracles are done through the Father, right? Or by the Father. So even though you can't split the Trinity in any way, that would be heretical. So yeah, the whole idea of the Metachrist is absolutely a blasphemy as concerns the Holy Communion, the act of Holy Communion. But, I don't know. I wouldn't get too stressed out about it. You can ignore it if you want. You don't have to play with communicants. You don't have to use any of the whatever, So, yeah. But I guess let me end this before it gets too long. I guess the main thing is the absence of the North American colonies makes no sense. And the reason that I've heard was given is that they're trying to avoid colonialism. That's just pure stupidity, since everyone colonized someone. Even our so-called natives in the United States, they're Asians. They did not spring up from the stones of the New World. They, invaded the area. And hey, if you believe some Native American stories, there were people here who probably came from somewhere else that they fought wars against and ended up killing. Great examples would be the red-headed giants and the moon-eyed people of Appalachia that the Cherokee talk about. So if, as I said, their idea is they're being anti-colonial, well, where do we cut the line of being anti-colonial? Does that mean no humans made it to the New World? It's completely empty. There's not a single human there at all, since every single being in the New World colonized it from somewhere else, regardless of when you're talking, whether you're talking Paleolithic, Neolithic, whenever, every single human being that ever existed in North, Central, or South America came from somewhere else. So, yeah. So when you cut off that, right? And one guy gave me this argument that, well, they've been at war for 800 years, therefore there wouldn't be any colonization. To which, I got to laugh, since the 13 colonies were not founded by the British. They were founded by British citizens who hired private ships, for the most part, to bring them over here to escape some bad times that were going on in Europe, because these guys were Puritans, right? So the fact that Britannia is at war would not stop the Pilgrims from having paid people to take them across the sea. The other issue is when people say, well, the oceans are completely dominated by the demonic fleets. It's like, okay, how did they make so many ships in Jerusalem? How did that happen? Because they have, see, the whole point of the demonic forces control the entire ocean makes zero sense. Now, how it could make a little bit of sense is you could say that on occasion, Leviathan comes up from the ocean and, attacks a fleet of ships or something. You could say that. Since Leviathan is mentioned in the Bible as, basically a gigantic demonic thing that lives in the ocean. But just to say point blank, the demons invented submarines in modern warfare. Okay, fine. But how did they build any of it? Right? How did they build any of it? Does hell have that much metal in it that it's just constantly shipping it out? And then do they have enough engineers and everything in Jerusalem to actually, or Tyre, or, Tel Aviv, or Capernaum, or wherever, to actually build these ships? I mean, the point is by not adding Americans in, and Canadians and everyone else, they just blow holes through their setting that need to be, you know, um, that definitely need to be answered for. I mean, you've got this lore that starts out pretty damn cool, and then all of a sudden, everything you're saying is just making that lore stupid. The Polish-Lithuanian Empire, I don't know if they even existed in 1914. I'm pretty sure they didn't. Poland did, and Lithuania did, but the actual Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth, no, they didn't. However, Tsarist Russia, Imperial Russia, they did exist, and Finland and Ukraine were part of their territory. So, along with the Crimea and a big chunk of North China. So, I don't want to believe that the creators of this game have made a conscientious choice to keep Imperial Russia and the colonies of the New World out of the game through prejudice. I don't want to believe that, but it kind of feels that way. And I mean, it's ridiculous, since, as we all know, without American, United States specifically, intervention, Europe would have lost both of the world wars, especially considering in the game they're fighting against the forces of hell. So, yeah, it's just, to me, it's just ridiculous. But hey, that's my opinion. Do you have opinions? Share them. And until next time we meet, peace and love to you, and God bless.